Authenticity is difficult to describe, difficult to define precisely, but it's sort of like art. You know it when you see it. And I'd also like to emphasize the importance of the topic, because it can sound like sort of a peripheral topic to the journey to awakening. It sounds like it really has to do more with how we interact with other people, and that's true, but it's not the whole story, because it really has to do with how we are relating to our own thought process. And I wanted to just offer two quotes. One is Nisargadatta Maharaj, who I consider probably the most brilliant sage of the last century. And what he said was that what's most essential is earnestness, which is essentially authenticity, right? Being authentic to oneself, and of course in relationship with other people as well. So that he came back to that point often, that was the most essential thing, rather than any particular practice, any particular belief system, that the most important thing, regardless of the path that you happen to be on, was earnestness, authenticity, right? The other quote that I'd like to offer is somewhat more startling. And this is from Adyashanti's teacher, who is a woman named Arvis Justi, a Zen teacher. And this Adya first heard her say this before his own awakening in his early 20s. And the quote is, "Only the phonies don't awaken." It's a startling statement, right? But again, it just points to the significance of this question of earnestness, self-honesty. So I think it's useful to start talking about this topic from the negative standpoint. Like, what does it feel like when we're inauthentic? And I'm sure we've all had those moments where we've said something that causes us to feel a separation from the person that we're talking to, or that it sounds like we're coming from a superior position and talking down to somebody, when we're not quite being honest with ourselves about something that we may have been responsible for, something that we neglected. And the body is very good at informing us when we are off base. There's this feeling of, sort of a contraction feeling, maybe a sudden feeling like we're just out of touch with what's happened, and sort of instant remorse. I'm imagining that we've all had some experiences like that, where we just feel like what we just said or what we just did was just inappropriate for the situation, right? Not helpful. Okay. And I'm suggesting that this is a good thing. And the reason that I'm suggesting that is that it's the way life informs us that we need to look more closely at something. It's like if you're walking across the room and you're not paying attention, your mind's somewhere else, and you stub your toe. The pain that you feel is your body's way of saying, hey, it's time to pay more attention to this. Watch where you're going, right? Be more attentive. So in this way, this discomfort that we can feel when we do or say something that's inauthentic is similar. It's life's way of um, drawing our attention to something that um, mm, needs our attention, right? Okay, so there are several ways that we um, become inauthentic. These aren't the only ways, of course. There are many ways to do that, but these are fairly common ways. So the first one is pretending to be something that we're not. So what nearly everyone does is pretend to be somebody that they're not, right? And then try to hold up that self-image. And the self-image that we try to enhance, polish, present to the world, maybe even present to ourselves, is the package of everything that we have done in the past, our skill set, our careers, our relationships, our level of wealth, our religion, our preferences, our hopes, our dreams, our fears, all that entire package. We've talked about that many times. So that entire package is what's happened to this body mind, how it's been conditioned, how it operates. And if we take ourselves to be that, then how we respond from that separate sense of self will never quite fit because it's not who we are. Every once in a while, we forget all about that and we find ourselves just saying something that's just the right thing to say in that moment, just the right thing to do, just what the other person needs to hear, exactly the right action. But that movement never comes out of premeditated thought. It never comes out of calculating the pros and cons and should I say this or should I say that. It comes from a much deeper intuitive place. A deeper intuitive place that's not being colored by all of that past conditioning, all of that package. So if we take ourselves to be this separate personal self and act from that space, it will always feel a little tight fitting, especially once we start to notice it, especially once we start to notice, um, I don't know, just that stale feeling of saying the same things and based on the same perceptions and same stories. Okay, so that's the first way, pretending to be something that we're not, pretending to be this separate self and acting from that space will always be a little out of sync because we're bringing the sort of conditioned past into the present moment when the present moment really requires um, just our presence with that innate, deeper intelligence. Okay, the second way we can that can cause us to feel inauthentic is pretending not to be somebody that we are. So this is sort of the mirror image of what we just talked about. So what we just talked about is not that we're not essentially this false self. That's true. But it's also relatively true that we require these body minds to function in this world. And therefore, that movement is through these thoroughly conditioned body minds. So there's some work to do there as well. So it's not denying anything within this conditioned self that causes us suffering or causes other people suffering. And again, the body's very good at informing us when that is the case, right? We're talking to somebody and we say something, and suddenly there was a connection there, there was a flow, and then suddenly there's a disconnect. And you can feel that. You can feel it in your belly. And suddenly you're over here and they're over there, and there's a gap, a canyon in between the two. So the body's informing us that that wasn't quite right. So we've talked about this a lot, that the way to work with these conditioned traits that aren't in service to what we truly know is to just remain present with them, notice them, not run away from them, not deny them. Again, this is what Nisargadatta calls earnestness, the willingness to just be with what's true. What's true, maybe this conditioned body tends to act like this under certain circumstances. And it's helpful to see, what circumstances trigger that behavior, what belief is operating when I act that way. What am I getting out of it? Am I getting it, pride? Or am I getting control? Am I getting power? I like to just feel depressed and small, and that's my comfort zone. But, so we can look at what we get out of it, and then also what it's costing us, and just see it clearly, see it without judgment. If we judge it, we're not seeing it clearly. We're in the middle of the fight, trying to sort out who's right and who's wrong. But if we just take a step back and notice it, that noticing has the capacity over time. Repeated noticing has the capacity to sort of disempower that tendency. It may continue for a while. It's like a bicycle. You're riding along, pedaling. You can stop pedaling and the bicycle's still moving, but eventually it'll come to a stop. Again, maybe not right away, doesn't stop on a dime, but if we stop pedaling, which in this case means fighting with our patterns, it will slow down, lose its potency. Okay, the third way we can perpetuate, occasional inauthenticity, or maybe frequent inauthenticity, is by holding a sense of either superiority or inferiority with regards to others. It all has to do with comparing, and it all has to do with the false self. How do I rate myself with other person, or how do I rate myself against my own personal standards that I've somehow adopted for some reason? And this tendency is, causes suffering, not just on a personal level when we're working with other people, because nobody likes to feel like they're being talked at from a higher level down to them, right? But it's also true, nobody really likes, well, maybe a few people do, but sort of kissing up to somebody else, that doesn't actually feel good either, except if your inner self is so devoid of meaning that you feed on that kind of attention. And, we can look around and see that there are examples of that. But there's also culturally, from a nationwide perspective, there have been, um, several horrific examples of whole cultures feeling superior in the last century. Mm. And just that need to feel superior cost tens of millions of lives, right? Mhm. Same movement. One's a personal movement, one's at a, you know, political, national level, could be at a religious sense of superiority, be cultural, could be racial. The European settlers coming into this country certainly had a um, superiority complex versus the Native Americans, and the consequences in terms of settling the western part of this country were devastating for the native cultures. So we can see that play out both on a personal level and a grander scheme. It's the same movement. It's the need somehow to feel like this separate self-entity is somehow enhanced, somehow special. I once had the opportunity on an in-person retreat with Eckhart Tolle when I was probably in the late 90s, when, there were about 40 people that went on his retreats. Um, and I had the opportunity just to ask him um, a question during one of the talks. What causes spiritual teachers to go off the deep end? And his answer was essentially they begin to feel special, right? Begin to feel that they are entitled somehow to special treatment. And then the slippery slope begins. Okay, the fourth one is uh, trying too hard to get it right. Right. It also has to do with perfection, right? This idea of perfection, like absolutely without flaw. Right? But that tendency to impose that level on day-to-day activities is not being within the flow of life. It's not coming from a relaxed place. There's an underlying sense of payoff there that, and again, it goes back to feeling, um, the need to like do it better than anybody else, or to be, you know, most the most clever, the smartest person in the room, the funniest person in the room, the most well-traveled person, the best dressed, whatever that movement is coming from some need to fill something um, other than the recognition of what we truly are. So those are just a few ways, and everything that we talk about in these talks points back to this sense of unconditioned awareness. That which already enlivens all of us. So the recognition of that, which can be called enlightenment or awakening or whatever you'd like to call it, but the recognition of that and the abiding sense of that um, will lead us to a deeper discovery that which we have every possibility of discovering within ourselves is already fully operational in everyone else. So this awakening, spiritual awakening, isn't something that elevates us above anybody. Actually, just the opposite. And I'm not saying opposite as in puts ourselves below other people. I'm just saying that that is the one and only place where we are all created equal. Created equal because that awareness is undifferentiated. It's not a personal awareness. It is life. It is the divine force, however you want to think about it, which enlivens and is present for this life, right? And within which our whole life unfolds, within which this body emerges and departs. So when we can come back to the recognition of that um, and learn that it is actually never absent, it becomes more and more natural just to operate from that place where there's just movement. There's things that are said, things that are done, doesn't disable us in any way, but it's moving from a different center. It's not moving from the mind, calculating, conceptualizing, planning, controlling mind. It's operating from um, life energy flow. There's an ease to that. And there's a, um, as we move in that direction, there can be the sense of not knowing quite how to function from that. It's a new place. It's not like, we recognize our essential nature one day and know how to move from that space to the next. No, it may take some years. In Zen, they say give it about 10 or 15 years. It's not like those 10 or 15 years are, um, there's still a striving, there's still a sense of lack. No, that's not true. But there is a learning how to move from that deeper space. And there's a relaxation into it. There's also a trust of it, trusting that deeper intelligence, heart wisdom, prajna, that movement, trusting that to function well, better, better than what our conceptualizing mind can do. The mind still is needed for certain functions. We're not talking about that. We're talking about just day-to-day interactions, how we move, how we spend our time, what the mind is doing, what we're engaged in, what we're believing, what we're saying. That movement. And over time, there's a deep relaxation where we learn to move just from that space, and we're even to the point where we're no longer calculating, am I moving from my ego self now, or am I moving from my deeper self now? Right? Because the only thing that would ask that question is, of course, ego, which is like, am I doing it right now? Am I getting it right? And we can relax even about that. And trust the body to inform us when we're not. Trust the body to inform us when we're being inauthentic. Be ready to see it. It's not like awakening gives us a free pass where there's never any issues to work out after that. Perfection, right? It's not like that. Much more earnest, to remain humble in that regard. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, one may get caught up in an egoic contraction. You have to be willing to admit to that. May happen, and if so, it'll be the next opportunity to learn. So this isn't about getting it right all the time. It's about being earnest, being authentic to oneself, being authentic in one's relations to the other. Another word for that is just self-honesty, sincerity. Just the willingness to remain present for whatever's happening, not run away, not ignore, not suppress, explain it away, not blame. Just see what really happens. Willing to learn from that. And as Nisargadatta said, that is the most important thing, regardless of one's practice. That importance to remain earnest.